Good morning. We are going to take a look at Chapter 7, Lesson 1. This part of the lesson is going to deal with using distributive property. And as you have seen in the last few days, when we are dealing with distributive property, that is when we have parentheses. So let's say that I have 2 times 3x minus 8. This is where I really need to keep my multiplication rules in the top of my mind, where I take a negative and multiply by a negative, and then I get a positive. If I take a negative times a positive, I get a negative. So we really have to keep those two things in mind. Now, when we have distributive property here, and we are multiplying everything inside the parentheses by whatever is directly in front of the 2. In this case, the 2, there's no negative sign, therefore it's positive. So we're going to take 2 and multiply it by 3x. Kind of ignore the x and just think, what's 2 times 3? We know that's 6. And then place the x behind it. We also have to take that positive 2 and multiply it by 8, but it's not positive 8 because there's a subtraction or a negative sign in front of it. We're actually multiplying 2 times negative 8, and we know that a negative times a positive is a negative, so therefore we get negative 16. So my simplified result in this expression is 6x minus 16. Now let's say that I have a negative number out in front. Let's say that I have negative 3 times negative 2x plus 1. Here I'm going to again multiply everything inside parentheses by whatever is directly in front of the parentheses, including the sign that's in front of the number. So in this case, there's a 3, but it's negative. So we're going to take negative 3, and we're multiplying it by our first number, which isn't 2, it's negative 2. And remember, if we have a negative times a negative, that results in a positive answer. So negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. Notice there's that x, so place that x behind it. And then we also have to take negative 3 and multiply it by 1 because there's a plus sign. It's by positive 1, and we know that a negative times a positive is equal to a negative. So 3 times 1, we have minus 3. Now, where it might get a little bit tricky at times is, what if I just have a negative sign? And then let's say that I have x plus 8. Well, anytime you don't have a number in front of the parentheses, but you have a sign, you have to assume that that's 1. And because there's a negative, it's actually negative 1. So we're multiplying negative 1 times x. Well, there's no number in front of x. So again, assume that it's 1. And we know that a negative times a positive is equal to a negative. So a negative 1 times positive 1 is negative 1. Place the x behind it. We also have a negative times a positive 8. And again, a negative times a positive is a negative. So we have minus 8. So now that there's only one item that has an x behind it and one that's a constant, just a number by itself, we have a simplified result, negative 1x minus 8. What happens if we have something like this? What if we have 3 times negative 2x minus 4? Well, in this case, again, everything inside the parentheses is going to be multiplied by that 3. Is that 3 positive or is it negative? It is positive because you don't see a negative sign. So we're taking negative 3 times negative 2x because there's that negative sign. A negative times a positive, again, is equal to a negative. So we have a positive 3 times a negative 2 gives me negative 6. There's that x, so I have to place the x behind the 6. I also have 3 times negative 4. A positive times a negative is a negative 12. Finished, negative 6 minus 12. All right, I have 3 problems that I want you to do. I want you to write each of these 3 problems on a piece of paper, and as soon as you have your result, bring those to me, and if we're correct and we're on the right track, then I will have you move on. The first problem is 2 times 3x minus 9 The second problem is negative 4 times x plus 1. And then the last problem is negative times 4x minus 5. So do all three of those problems. When you're finished with those three problems, bring them to me. I will check them. And then if we need to move on, we'll move on. If not, we will get a little bit of guidance. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.